Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third installment of the Department of Communication Seminar Series 2023-2024. So for today, our featured speaker is Miss Janelle Paris, a full-time instructor at the Ateneo de Manila University's Department of Communication. She teaches communication theory and introductory media studies courses. She is a graduate of the Ateneo ABCom program, just like most of you here. And she also holds an MA in International Studies in Media, Power and Difference from Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Spain. She is interested in critical media studies, focusing on areas of gender, popular culture, as well as journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, Janelle Paris.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, as you might have seen from the pub mats and as maybe promoted by your comm instructors, this talk will be about post-feminist media studies. Well, I titled it this way, right? Post-feminist media studies since Birds of Prey. This isn't supposed to capture post-feminist media studies at large. It's just in relation to how I've engaged with it. So yeah, I'm gonna start with a typical caveat of, I can't begin to imagine covering all there is that is to be known or that I know about post-feminist media culture in such a short presentation, and so I will relate it to how I have engaged with this field of study. Okay, so I'll start with an outline of my presentation. So, of course, I will define what post-feminism is, some of its key assumptions, some post-feminist objects of analysis, which is kind of, these are embedded in, when I talk about key assumptions, they're kind of embedded there. And then, of course, I'll talk about a 2021 paper that I wrote with a collaborator and a good friend of mine. It's a paper on Birds of Prey and online constructions of what we call cinematic feminisms. And then, if you were in my Com 120 class from last semester, you might have heard about this, but I have an ongoing project where I want to understand masculinities in post-feminism, and I would like to theorize what I provisionally call the baby girl. So I will also talk about that. And then, of course, we'll end with some critiques and possibilities that we can do with the framework. And of course, Q&A. You can also, point out some critiques and possibilities yourselves. All right, so let me start. Okay, so what is post-feminism? Not to make it about me, but I will start with how I first encountered this concept, right? So I first encountered this concept through two of Rosalind Gill's articles, which are considered foundational in post-feminist media studies. So they're titled Post-Feminist Media Culture, Elements of a Sensibility, where she points out the main elements of post-feminism, right? And another article called Postfeminism, New Feminist Visibilities in Post-Feminist Times, which is, a revision of some of the sensibilities or some of the factors there that no longer make sense around 10 years on. And as you can see, the photo here is, if you're familiar with the show Fleabag, it's a screenshot from Fleabag where the characters attend like a feminist seminar and they're very reluctant to identify as feminists. And this reluctance really is a key assumption or a key quality of post-feminism, like this reluctance to be, girl power, I am a feminist, and all of the politics that comes with it. But I also point it out here because this was one of my first, I guess, academic engagements with the concept. So I wrote a paper for a non-degree course of media ethics in which I analyzed the post-feminist sensibilities in Fleabag. Now, I returned to that article very recently, and while reading it, I thought the entire time, I can't believe I wrote all of this. It seemed like a very juvenile engagement with post-feminism, but that's usually our experience when we first encounter these conceptual frameworks. But I remember at the time it was really exciting for me to encounter like such a framework that encapsulated a lot of what I saw and felt about media representations of women, of women's relations. But anyway, so that's just the background, right? It's the lore behind why I'm so into post-feminism. So yeah, these works were my introduction to post-feminism, as Gill would put it, a sensibility, right, that runs through culture, but also as a framework to analyze the contradictory ways that women understand and live within freedom and modernity, discipline and tradition. So inherently, it's about contradictions, and those contradictions are situated within, like this. Are situated within claims of women's agency, power, and feminism. So Gill's description of post-feminism as a sensibility encapsulates its porousness and its ambiguities. So it is not a set of fixed and predetermined beliefs, but rather hinged on fluid interactions between individual meaning-making within societal constraints, right? Post-feminism is also deeply and reluctantly entangled with feminism. As Gill writes, arguments about post-feminism are debates about nothing less than the transformations in feminism and transformations in media culture and their mutual relationship. So if you're familiar with the circuit of culture, right, and the primary assumptions of cultural studies, this is very much within that approach. So as mediated constructions of women, their relations, and their desires evolve, so too do post-feminist sensibilities or constructions of post-feminism. And so too do our ways of talking about it. And so too do like industrial ways of circulating them, etc. Okay, and like I pointed out very briefly, at the core of post-feminism is the concept of women's agency. So I'm still not done with my introductory remarks on post-feminism, right? So what really is it? And I will describe it briefly through these three interrelated points. So post-feminism is a set of values characterized by a contradictory relationship with feminism. It has reframed feminism as an individual project rather than a collective politics. And finally, it is disseminated through various forms of media, constructing women as empowered individuals and consumers. Okay, so first, right, so post-feminism is a set of values characterized by a contradictory relationship with feminism. So it is an entanglement with feminism. I really like this word, entanglement, because it captures the messiness of it, right? And it really is messy. So feminism, as we know it to be political, right, even militant, that's not what post-feminism is trying to do. Feminism in post-feminist media culture is being taken into account, but also being attacked. So post-feminism acknowledges the victories of feminism, but thinks there is no need for it anymore, right? So by acknowledging that, we're equal now, right, we have equal rights, we have these privileges, it acknowledges that feminism has, gained its victories. And that's enough in post-feminist media culture, right? There's no need for that anymore. The way to be, liberated female subjects in the current contemporary times is not through post-feminism as we know it to be, the iterations of like the first wave, the third wave, fourth wave, as political, right? And even as militant. It may also only partially incorporate feminist victories or gains. In some ways, post-feminist discourses also engage in some form of historical revisionism. That is revising where the success of feminism has come from, or where it can come from still. Like I said, from collective, political, even radical struggles. And it is a result too, I think, of how feminist struggles have been portrayed. So I think we're very familiar with very iconic images of feminism, right? So the "We Can Do It" poster, for example, suffragettes, right? Riot Girl, the loud kinds of feminism. And I think because of the iconicness of these images, they've been dehistoricized. So we don't really know what went on there, and what the radical backgrounds of those images might be. And because of this, we come to just see them as individual images that we can automatically return to or refer to when we think feminism, right? But what that obscures is the decades-long, even centuries-long struggle for this so-called equality, which we still don't have, by the way. So yeah. More recently, though, to identify as feminist is seen as a form of cultural and social currency, right? So while post-feminism started as this concept that had this disavowal of feminism, what scholars have pointed out is now it's seen as pretty cool, right? Like if you're a feminist, it's a form of social and cultural capital. This is what scholars have called the cooling or making cool of feminism. But, some feminisms are cooler than others. This is a result in part of celebrity culture and how feminism interacts with that, domain of culture, and how famous women have taken up the feminist identity. Now, with all this being said about, right, post-feminism's relationship with feminism, it gets a little tricky because we don't really want to fall into the trap of having to define what feminism should be or what singular feminism should be, right? I think, for one, I believe in multiple feminisms, right? Not to say that all feminisms are equally valid, right? Of course, I feel like I would have a bias towards, a more political, systemic kind of feminism. But again, the point of post-feminist media studies isn't really to arbitrate, what is the correct feminism. Like, it's not really concerned with that, but rather the constructions around these kinds of arguments. So very cultural studies, as I've pointed out. So, but what we can do to distinguish, right, the post-feminist sensibility from feminism is that post-feminism is devoid of political action. This is the main argument through most of the literature in post-feminism. That's what's absent from it, the politics, right? The praxis, as some other people would coin it. So, yeah. So to the next point, related, of course, to again, I said these points are interrelated. So related to my previous point, the reframing of feminism as an individual project rather than a collective politics. So within post-feminist media culture, female empowerment is framed as an individual project, and emancipation is co-opted as a matter of personal choice. So I think emancipation, this is a very intentional choice of a word, and this is the word really that appears in a lot of post-feminist media studies and what we might consider post-feminist media texts. What I've noticed is that liberation has not been co-opted, right, as a word to describe all of these representations of women's agency, and I personally think that's a good thing. Although, it might happen. It probably will. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting digression. Like, it's usually emancipation, agency, but liberation hasn't been co-opted yet in popular understandings of feminism. So highlighting this individualizing project is post-feminist media culture's focus on the body. And it is seen as women's primary source of power. So the individualizing is usually concentrated on the body. It's not the only domain of power / disempowerment, but it's usually what the focus of a lot of media texts are. So a focus on the body and how it is seen as women's primary source of power. And because it is the primary source of power, it is also the primary site of the regulation of this power. So ironically, you have women who have purportedly, right, individual empowerment in their own terms. So they decide if they're empowered or not. But that is regulated, supported through self-discipline regimes or regimens, right, to make up for the body's perceived lack or at times its perceived excess. But the point is, these regimes are said to be under one's control, right? So even if they tend to be oppressive, oppressive is not the right word. Even if they tend to be a little too much, they are seen to be still under, an individual woman's control. And so that's still, a victory in the larger scheme of things. So it's kind of like a you problem, like a skill issue, if you will. So that's how it's framed in post-feminist media studies. Okay. And lastly, right, post-feminist media culture is disseminated circulated, reappropriated, articulated through various forms of media, constructing women as empowered individuals and consumers. So the site of this empowerment typically plays out in discussions of sexual politics on the one hand and consumerism on the other, and sometimes together. So women are no longer just desired objects, but are also seen as desiring subjects themselves. In the media, there's also more openness to discuss and portray sex and sexuality, but usually the heterosexual and heteronormative kind. There's also a psychologizing of sexual partners, framing the way to understand them as predominantly cognitive and therefore individual rather than social or political. These new understandings and debates may result in contradictory celebrations of, for example, sex work as emancipatory work, but the omission of its systemic foundations and histories. So that's just one example. There's also a lot of focus in post-feminist scholarship on consumerism and entrepreneurship. A sense of control is derived through consumer spending. There are sellable products as solutions to nearly every problem in nearly every domain of a woman's life. So there are products that will help you feel confident. There are products that will help you protect you from harm, clear your skin, that will keep you at an ideal weight, or so on and so forth, right? So there are products for all of this. And, if I think if you have an idea of what your, say, like Instagram ads are like you probably would have been marketed some sort of thing that will solve all of your contemporary problems. So yeah, that's another key thing in post-feminist media culture. And relatedly, the entrepreneurial spirit is seen as a way to succeed in a man's capitalist world. So an example of this would be like lean-in feminism of the Sheryl Sandberg, Elizabeth Holmes types, but also ways of monetizing aspirational practices and ideal lifestyles, right? So the how to be an it girl vlog sort of thing, that's also within this logic of entrepreneurial subjectivity. Elsewhere, post-feminism has been referred to as the gendered expression of neoliberalism. So it offers ideal patterns of living as a woman in a consumerist world. So you buy stuff to make you feel good, to fix your life, but you're also entrepreneurial. So you make money for yourself. And are able to sustain living in this, kind of world. So again, the themes of choice and self-control tend to be concentrated within these domains. So this is just a way to wrap up like all of that has been said, which might be repetitive, but this is just a sort of synthesis before we move on to the next part. So these themes of choice and self-control tend to be concentrated within these domains, right? The body, sexual desires, one's often professional success, and control over these is seen as a way to deal with contemporary consumers' life. So in summary, this is what post-feminist media culture is, right? So it's not a politics, but a set of values that selectively co-opts certain feminist assumptions in order to make the experience of womanhood compatible with our own consumerist way of life. It encompasses the many contradictory ways that media forms portray women and feminism. And finally, it makes feminism cool, fun, and apolitical. So, yeah. All that said, I take the cultural standpoint. That is, I see post-feminist constructions as articulations across various sites of culture, from media representations to the ways we talk about these representations, to the ways that they construct our own relationships with ourselves, with others, the ways they are circulated via particular industry logics, and current feminist and anti-feminist politics. So, having said all that, post-feminism, outside of what we know as post-feminist media culture, and if we translate it as a theoretical lens, it becomes a productive framework for the analysis of gender cultures that are replete with contradictory discourses of freedom and modernity on the one hand, and discipline and nostalgia on the other. So I think aside from the concept of agency, another key thing that binds post-feminism really is this idea of contradictions that are related to this idea of agency. And so it is with this premise, right? And in view of all this, I will now discuss Birds of Prey and the cinematic feminisms in Birds of Prey. So I wanted to chart all of that, all of these contradictory discourses that I've been talking about. I wanted to chart those in pop culture, particularly the ways that people online talk about popular culture, specifically films. So I actually worked on this paper in 2020. It was while I was doing my MA remotely. I don't remember what started this as an idea, really, but I do remember at one point, my collaborator, who's Joshua Oyheng from, he's with the psych department, and he's also one of my best friends. We noticed that Birds of Prey was trending alongside Sonic the Hedgehog on Twitter, and we jokingly thought about how it would be funny if those were related. And actually, in some ways, they were. But anyway, so in this paper, which we titled Contentious Practices of Post-Feminist Audiencing, Online Discourse About Cinematic Feminisms in Birds of Prey, we looked at online audience discourse surrounding the movie, situating it with other superhero films centering women characters. So Birds of Prey actually had become popular alongside other flicks like Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, and also within this context of an increased visibility of other women characters in superhero films. So it wasn't all that new, of course, in the superhero movie genre. I think we grew up, right, like with having popular characters like Black Widow, more recently Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy. So it wasn't really new. What was new was they were the center of these films. So that was what was remarkable about it, and the way, and this was partly a reflection changes within industry norms that began to see central women characters as less of precarious financial gambles and more profitable. Right. So it wasn't at all innocent in that, you know, it wasn't like, oh, it's time for women's voices and women's narratives to be heard. No, there was also like a financial, like an obvious financial stake that came with it. And, you know, that's another paper that deals with another domain of the circuit of culture. And so I won't belabor that point. But anyway. So we looked at what we referred to as post-feminist audiencing using the following framework. So I've already talked about, you know, I've already laid out the key assumptions of post-feminism in my previous slides. So let me discuss a bit what I mean by performativity here, because I think this lends itself very easily to being just used however, right? So performativity here, it allows us to shift from understanding innate concerns with audiences' cognitive or emotional experiences to explicitly consider symbolic and material practices which constitute audience engagements with text, in this case, Birds of Prey, right? So it's a very discursive kind of performance. This is after Terry Lovell's feminist understanding of performativity, which recognizes institutional constraints on these utterances or these discursive possibilities or these ways of talking about media text symbolically and materially, right? But allows for creative appropriation despite or within the bounds of those institutional constraints. And finally, this audiencing was, of course, within networked online publics. So it was from Twitter. When it was still called Twitter and it was still easy to get tweets from Twitter. Now you gotta pay for it. But yeah, this was in that context. So it was premised as well on particular ways that discourses are circulated in such spaces. So meaning to say Twitter. So for example, right, on Twitter, the form of engagement is measured in the form of likes, shares, which may be seen as some sort of legitimacy, right? But also the ability to be able to archive or document, right? Like these textual utterances, leads the medium to repetition and recirculation. So there's a bit more, it gives us more of a possibility to understand some reactions as common or as popular because of the recirculation. So, that was our framework. Now, for methods, we did a mixed methods design. So over 600,000 tweets were collected using terms related to the study. Terms like Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey, Warner Brothers, Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn, all of these. So the 600,000 tweets were collected through not by me, it was by my collaborator. But we didn't do it one by one, like clearly, like you can't You can't do that. But yeah, so 600, I think it was around 630,000 tweets. And analysis came in two phases. And of course, if you have like this huge corpus, right, of tweets, you can't do like just a qualitative analysis. So the first phase of the analysis was done through latent dirichlet allocation, or LDA, which is, like it's done through code. And very clearly, I'm not a quants person. I did not do that. But what LDA does is, right, it identifies the degree to which words are used with other words in the tweets, right? So for example, empowerment, choice, heroine, these were words that were clustered together. And how these words were taken together suggests a distinct discussion about women's agency and birds of prey. In other words, it does the topic clustering. So it shows you what words are interrelated, and they kind of cohere into certain topics. And then the second phase of the analysis was discourse analysis after Carla Willig. So as many of you might know, there are a lot of ways to do discourse analysis, and this is just one way, Carla Willig's way of doing it, which is actually very, it's after Michel Foucault, so identifying social objects, identifying practices, and so on that are related to these bigger discourses and these performances of, these discussions about post-feminism. So yeah. So discourse analysis allowed us to situate the computationally defined topics within explicit and inexplicit gendered power relations online. So with the former, so the idea is because, so we used mixed methods because, with the former, we did not want to claim any sort of positivist-oriented objectivity, which is why we presented a situated discourse analysis in our second phase from the participants in the same phenomenon we examined. So this also comes with self-reflexivity as authors, because of our subject positions as, one, me, a young woman, and the other author, a man, who came of age as digital natives and within the contemporary post-feminist turn in popular media. And something we can't write in a journal article is we are also both chronically online. And so that also came into it. So we just needed some craftier ways of saying that for publication on feminist media studies. But that also came into play here. Okay. So just to give you a picture of the quantitative topics, or the topics that came up in the quantitative analysis. So, okay, so you have, what the code was able to give us was, it clustered certain words, and there were 6 topics that emerged. And the storylines here, we were the ones who crafted these, but with the words that came up as really dominant within each topic. And you can see here the percent of tweets from the 600 or so thousand that these topics represent. Okay, so yeah, let's see. I won't go through each one of them, but maybe I'll read like the first 3. So topic 1, I loved the movie. It was really good and it made me happy. Women are the best. Give it the time of day to watch it. Topic 2, fans are fighting over how the movie made less in theaters than expected of a box office film, given its budget. Topic 3, the way Harley Quinn has graced cinema is a long way from Joker and the Suicide Squad. She really got me thinking with her egg sandwich. Oh my god, yeah, I remember. I stan Margot Robbie. She is my favorite. Just look at her photos, like this image of her in a hot designer jacket. Okay. And women are increasingly directing movies, but some men think characters with their high-waist shorts are unappealing. And topic 6, the ugly costuming played a major role in the dumb emancipation movie flopping. It made less than the Sonic movie. I told you Sonic was gonna come into play here at some point. So from these topics, right, that we determined computationally or quantitatively, we did more, synthesizing, we did more processing, and came up with these discourses, right? Again, like I mentioned, we took after the Carla Willig tradition of discourse analysis. So how we determined these discourses was through the social objects, the subject positions, and the practices that the tweets invoked. So what we did was we qualitatively analyzed tweets which received the highest scores for each topic. And again, determining which ones received the highest scores was a, like the code did it. So yeah. So you have here, I'll give you a few minutes to read if you can. I'm sorry, it's quite, like, the text is quite small. So we came up with four, discourses, right? So one is the ride or die, or raging feminism. So again, the goal of our study really was to determine cinematic feminisms, and these were the cinematic feminisms that we came up with. So one was raging feminism, right? It was a very celebratory kind of feminism where it really celebrated the sort of very loud, sometimes like violent kinds of performances and representations in the film. We also came up with calibrated feminism. So it's just, like it toes the line between being too much. So it's like just enough feminism. So it was celebrating those aspects of the film and also aspects of the discourses about the film, right? The discussions about the film. And then on the on the other side of things, you have tweets calling BOP or Birds of Prey overbearing in its feminism. So these are the, men's rights activist coded subjects. But the thing is, we weren't, the study didn't really allow us to determine who was saying these things. And so when I say them, it's just, coded. So these are the male coded parts of the analysis, right? And then finally, the last discourse that emerges, seeing Birds of Prey as just not like it's just a movie. So it's completely apolitical. So it doesn't even identify as feminist at all. So it's not that deep. It's just a film. Why are we, having this much of an argument about it? It's just a film. So it shouldn't be political and discourses like this, right? So these were the cinematic feminisms that came out. As conclusions, these were, this is just a summary of some of our conclusions, right? So we found that post-feminist media audiencing goes beyond the binary acceptance or rejection of women's stories, right? So it's good, but, or it's bad, but, there are a lot of these caveats and explaining why they think it's good or why they think it's bad. There are ways in which popular feminism can conflate cinematic representation with feminist praxis. So this specifically was present in what we termed as raging feminism. So they saw these really explicit, loud representations within the film as being very feminist, right? Like a feminist victory, right? But hold on, like it's just an image in film. And one way that we also thought about this was in the context of, Margot Robbie. Like, to an extent, there was a praxis element to this, because Margot Robbie was involved in the production, right? So in a way, she was, to an extent, she was in charge of her own representation. And, that's something that shouldn't be denied or dismissed, right? But, to the extent to which it is, complete, like a complete feminist victory, that's something else. But yeah, that's how, that's one way that popular feminism and discussions around it played out in these tweets and in these discourses. We also found that popular misogyny, on the other hand, and it's often seen as the flip side, right, of popular feminism, it can also play out through seemingly benevolent or naturalized emissions of gendered politics in movies. So specifically, seeing the film as just a movie that need not respond to broader politics, for example. They tend to invoke depoliticized positions that are not necessarily misogynist, right? But they can be read as anti-feminist. So even if they're like kind about it, or they're not so rude about it, or they're not very men's rights activist coded about it, it seems like a disavowal of the political potential of feminism, or a film that has trickles of feminism in it. And finally, we saw that constructions of women's agency deeply intertwined with economic activity and political vision in producing gendered selves. And these identifications and disidentifications with the film's politics are within assertions of not watching the film or watching it, supporting it, and the support translating into commercial success, right? So for those with raging feminism within the discourses, right, celebration of the film's portrayals, watching it is seen not just as support of the film itself, but also of the broader feminist movement. And then on the other hand, you have those seeing it as preachy garbage, who think of its commercial failure as a confirmation of feminism being, like wrong, or feminism being being wrong, terrible, distasteful, and all of that. So they're kind of operating on the same logic, right? Like that it's the commercial success that kind of determines the value of feminism, right? So I think that was one of the most interesting insights for us, is because, it's the raging feminists and the men's rights activists coded audiences operating on this same logic. So ultimately, I think what our study did was build on Yoke Hermes's project of looking not at gender per se, but rather the ways in which audience discourses do gendering, on gendered constructions of women's agency in the specific genre of the superhero film. So like I said, we weren't able to determine whether, the tweets came from women, men, and so on. And that wasn't really our project, but, it is more interested in constructions of gender rather than, how specific genders react to certain representations. Okay. So, following from this, still following from this project that's been pioneered by a lot of post-feminist media scholars, I'm now really, really interested in the question of post-feminist masculinities. And I think it's also important, and it's actually not widely studied. Some of these are my recent favorite works on masculinities within post-feminist media culture. They write about the limited ways that masculinities are revised, that is made not traditional or dominant. So in many of these studies, right, it's been found that women are seen to be having more power in contemporary media representations or discourses, but the relations are maintained within heteronormative constraints more often than not. So, it's doing some sort of reconfiguration of dynamics, but still within very acceptable constraints or limits. This brings us to my current project, which is really interested in a particular kind of contemporary masculinity as constructed by online audiences. And again, I have to premise this with the fact that I am, yes, very online. So this particular construction of masculinity is what, it's not a term that I came up with, but it is a term that I use. So it is the baby girl. So I really want to theorize the baby girl. I apologize because I think I'm about to say the word baby girl and its derivatives way too many times in the next few minutes. But yeah, like I said, I come to this project bearing the weight of my own subject position. That is, as someone who engages in baby girling, is online, is into particular genre of media that portrays men as, to a certain extent, vulnerable. So anyway, these are some men that I have seen baby girl online. Not that it isn't exclusively, it's not exclusively baby girl that's used to refer to them, right? Sometimes they are referred to as knowing what it feels like to be a teenage girl. Sometimes they're seen as capable of expressing the feminine urge to do, etc., etc. Sometimes they're also characterized as knowing what girlhood is like. And what's interesting to me is they're not just fictional characters. They're also K-pop idols who are a baby girl, and that's also a very interesting domain of that's an interesting sphere for data. But yeah, some of them are Kendall Roy from Succession, Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer specifically, Carmi from The Bear, Nathan Fielder, if you're familiar with Nathan For You, and I think a very good example of millennial media, Will Graham from Hannibal. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, it also has to be said that most of this baby girling is done with irony, right? So that's also conceptual. It has to be taken into account conceptually, and that's just a note for myself, actually. Anyway, so what are the things that have been said about the baby girl? So, online there's also confusion about what this is. So you have this Reddit post asking, what does it mean? Why do women call guys baby girl now? And is it slang for anything? Like, I've heard women being called baby girl, but it is different for a man to be called that in any way. I've been seeing it a lot. I just don't get it. Not saying it's a bad thing, just trying to understand. And that's literally me. I'm just trying to understand. Anyway, so my preliminary analysis, with the limited sort of like online talk that I've seen, is that baby girling can be seen as an act of queering. And by that I mean, just kind of destabilizing what we typically know as masculinity, right? So here you have a Reddit post saying, here, don't know about everywhere else, but generally on Twitter, it's coming from queer people celebrating the challenging of gender norms. Baby girl is a personality trope, similar to how you don't have to be a parent or a particular gender to give off MILF or DILF vibes. You can be neither baby nor girl and still be a baby girl. Oh, that's so good. Anyway, so yeah, in a post like this, you see baby girling as an act of queering. In this related screenshot, I say that the baby girl is seen as like a representation of a comfortable / comforting kind of masculinity, right? So what this post says is this. I saw this definition used to define baby girl, and it's exactly what comes to mind when a guy that's especially attractive to me acts a certain way. Baby girl is a phrase used to describe when a man is so primally attractive that you want to provide for him. Baby girl is a term of endearment for when a man is being cute, comfortable in his masculinity, or weak in an evocative way. So yeah, that's why I, provisionally label it as this, right? It's like, it's a comfortable but also comforting kind of masculinity. So my plan really is to do this project in 2 phases. So first, looking at online talk like this, and by extension, what they say as the qualities of a baby girl. So this will be textual, the textual analysis component. But later, I would really like to understand what the baby girling does for the subject that does it, right? So for the actors that do the baby girling, like what pleasure do you derive from that, if any? So yeah, so these are my preliminary thoughts. So I see so far, these are like hypotheses, I guess, that the act of baby girling is a limited assertion of power within a very heteronormative gender framework, right? And the limited power takes the form of care, right? Like I said, right? Or like this screenshot said, you want to provide for the baby girl, right? So there's a reconfiguration of power, but the power is expressed through this like taking care. And I also think that baby girling is less about the inherent qualities of the baby girl, but rather the subject positions of those doing the baby girling. That's why I'm really interested in doing like the second part, which really looks at, what pleasures are derived from this act. And yeah, I want to look at that within the context of post-feminist discourses. So yeah, very much constrained within ideas of like women's relations with these baby girl men or celebrities or characters. And I really think like this second point. Well, from what I've seen so far, and of course I need to see more discussions about it. Like for example, a straight girl baby girling a man is different from like a lesbian woman doing it. So I really want to understand the nuances there. So yeah. And also, if you see any acts of baby girling online, please write to me. I really will need it for the first phase. Some critiques of the post-feminist framework, right? And of course, also possibilities of it. So it's been critiqued for a focus on heteronormative practices and relations. And I think it's because, the object of study tends to really be inundated with these kinds of representations. And so like a lot of the scholarship comes from these kinds of relations. Another critique is that it reproduces a largely Euro-American frame of thinking about gender relations. And my own experience with doing the paper on BOP, for example, and doing all of this preliminary study on the baby girl has shown me how conversant I can be with these Euro-American ways of talking about gender, and how it's talked about. And, that needs to change. And that's a separate, I think, academic endeavor. It also can ironically reproduce the depoliticization that it critiques. This is a question within academia more broadly, though, and I won't belabor this point, because one could argue that even critical work on these discourses have no politics as long as they stay within the spaces of academia. But anyway, I'll leave it at that, because again, that's a broader sort of conversation. And also recently, there's an overwhelming focus on textual analysis in post-feminist media studies. And according to the likes of Amanda Press, there is a need for an ethnographic turn. And this is really what I want to do at least with one of my projects, which is to understand, again, the subject positions of the baby girlers of the world. But yes, this is something I'd like to take up. It's not a perfect framework, but it really is illuminating. And it actually lends to a lot of fun ideas like this. I'm an advocate for not super serious scholarship. I mean, of course, this has serious implications, but it's just to say that post-feminist media studies can be really fun, and so it can also start with really silly questions. That's all I have for now. If you have questions, and if you have leads, I'll be open to them. Thank you.